Jim, thank you for presenting today. We've got 15 minutes. Take it away.
Okay, well, I'm one who believes that human beings are designed, meant to be in relationships, and I'm very happy with the relationships that I've had the opportunity to forge in this group. And for those of you with whom I haven't had that opportunity yet, just simply for lack of time, it's going to happen. So at least I'll do my part for it. So I first met a woman, gosh, we were so much younger. It was in the early 80s. She was a poet, artist. We weren't romantically involved in any way. She had this little boy. And years later, I get a call from this. Well, actually, I first started seeing Facebook posts from this young man. He was in Togo with his wife, and they were in the Peace Corps. Togo's in West Africa. It's a pretty grim place to be. Came back, shared photos with us, everything. So he grew up before my very eyes, and we stayed in touch over this probably 21 years. And then I get a call, and he's buying a house, right? So I felt, wow, here's an opportunity to just do the very best job I can to make this as easy a process as I can with this young guy and his new wife. And it worked out that he worked for the federal government. And so with his provision of pay stubs, W-2s, and bank statements, we were able to get that house closed for him in 12 days. His, which was good because it was a red-hot seller's market, and 3 months later, their first child was born, and I had the opportunity to be at that baby shower, which was a fun event because I got to see a lot of other old people. His mom, I should say old friends as in long-term friends, although there were quite a few old people there. His mom, shortly before that, in her 60s, had gone to Cambodia. This is the woman I talked about, and was in the Peace Corps there. Very interesting people. So then there was David. David contacted me via Google. Thank you, Google. And he was a commercial real estate appraiser in Michigan. And we corresponded for about 3 years as he was considering moving to Colorado with his family. And ultimately, he asked if I would help introduce him to some local banks that would need commercial appraisers, which I did. And ultimately, they did move. And they bought a new home in Colorado, and the builder offered them just, the sun and the moon and the stars if they would get their loan with the builder. And my advice to him was take it. As soon as he closed and was in the house, we did a refinance, and I lowered his interest rate for 0.25%, on a $500,000 loan, and no cost to him. We're still in touch. I still refer him to commercial clients. He's certified to banks, basically. Mike, you might want to know about it too. He actually does now work with Mountain States Bank of Commerce as one of the clients that we refer to. Important relationship to me. He continues to be available to me if I have a question, a property-related, appraisal-related question. He's a very deep resource for me in terms of what he knows. Then we had Elliott. Now, Elliott's an interesting guy. He moved here from Los Angeles. He had been living in his mom's house for a number of years, caretaking her. She had passed away, and he sold the house, and he had a little shy of $1 million in the bank, but he had left his practice in Los Angeles, so he really didn't have a source of income. And so we talked about it, and even though, gosh, I'm going to get down into the weeds just a little bit here to make a distinction, but with a conventional loan, I couldn't have done what I'm going to describe, which was using a different type of a loan program, what we call a non-qualified mortgage program. We were able to consider those assets as an annuity, and Dan can talk about annuities later, but basically we just said a certain portion of this $1 million we will consider as ordinary income for you, which means he didn't have to pay all cash for this house and deplete his retirement account. So he still had about $750,000 in his retirement account. I didn't mention the name of it, but just so you know.
That's the
But now he has a mortgage on the house. He does intend to practice here, but he hasn't established a practice. Still in touch with him. He occasionally has a question about another restaurant. He's gone through my first list that I gave him, but he seems to enjoy the ones that I've referred him to so far. Excuse me. We had Chad and Holly. Oh, by the way, I just went through my closed loans this year. This is all this year. Okay, and it seems like every single time I do a loan, there's a story with that loan, and that's where these stories come from. So Chad and Holly, nice young couple, 2 kids. She's a stay-at-home mom. They were wanting to buy another house, a bigger house out in Heatherwood. They had already been in touch with a realtor who had listed a home that they were interested in, so that realtor worked both the house that they were interested in buying and also took the listing on the one that they were currently living in and would be selling. So there were fewer moving parts, but it felt to me that that what they had originally planned to do, which was to just go into this new property and get a new loan and sell their house, wasn't going to leave them in the best situation. Because he had a ton of student loans, like $80,000 worth of student loans. The payments were horrific. He had a car, he had a bunch of credit cards. But they did have a bunch of equity in their home. So what I advised was, when you sell your home, let's pay off all of this debt, and we'll get a bigger loan on your new home, much bigger than the loan that you have now on your current home. And the outcome was that their monthly payments altogether were $500 a month less with the bigger loan on the new home. So sometimes it's not so much that the person doesn't have resources, they just don't have a way of thinking about it that over my 40 years in the business I've developed. They did a nice review for me on Google and have sent a couple of other clients my way. Oh gosh. Then we have, sorry for the delay. Oh yeah, Doug. Doug's an interesting guy. Actually, let me talk about Greg first. Oh boy. So I get a call from this guy, Greg. He works at Alfalfa's. And he had been living as a caretaker in his mom's home, similar to Elliott. We decided to meet at my home office in Lyons, and the stench of burning rope was just overwhelming when he came into my home office, which will give you a little bit of information about the state of his mind when he arrived. He had been living with his mom rent-free as caretaker. Mom had some savings. The mortgage was coming out, the mortgage payment was coming out of his mom's savings. After Mom passed away, he blew through the savings, and now the mortgage is several months behind. He only owed $33,000 on a house that was worth about $270,000. He had a $5,000 car payment, or $5,000 car loan. He could have rented one of the rooms in his house for $650 or $700 a month, more than enough to make the mortgage payments. And I, in the spirit of trying to help him, even though there was nothing I could do directly, offered the advice that maybe what he needed to do to save the house, because it was going to be foreclosed on, probably has been by now. And I'll come back to that in just a second. He just needed to get a second job for a couple of months, pay back, get the mortgage up to speed, clean it up. The reason he didn't have a renter is because it was a pigsty. That's what he told me, those are his words. Couldn't get a renter in there. And I said, clean it up, get yourself a renter in here. We've got enough income, we can qualify you for enough to pay off this mortgage, get you a lower rate, pay off your car. You won't even have a house payment, things will be great. Oh, I can't get another job. So he reminded me so very much of one of my favorite Western philosophers, John Wayne, who was quoted as saying, life is tough. It's especially tough if you're stupid.
Jim, there's 4 minutes left if you want to keep going or if you want to.
Oh, I got a minute. So you
Sure, I'm sure you do.
Okay. So John and Whitney. John's a great local contractor. I actually had his boss for 45 years. Excuse me. And it was the boss that referred them to me. And they were having trouble getting some construction financing for a second home they wanted to build for themselves up in Boulder. The banks just weren't interested in that area, didn't know the market, couldn't get comfortable with the appraisal and all of that. And so what I realized was they had enough equity in their homes and they actually live in Loveland, enough equity in their home in Loveland that we could refinance their home in Loveland and have the cash that they needed to complete the property in Leadville. So they went with that, and at the same time they also had another rental house that was a very high interest rate, so we did that one too. And now, having done all of that, I hear from them just about every month with respect to the status of the construction of their home in Leadville, and they have also sent one other person to me. Excuse me. You know, super nice guy, very competent contractor, and his wife works for, what's the name of the blinds company?
Hunter Douglas?
Select Blinds?
Blinds, and she's, you know, graphic designer.
Hunter
Yeah.
Douglas.
3 miles.
Venetian.
Now we have
3 miles.
We have a person that I'm working with right now, and got a call from this guy. He's had some sort of a health event, and so he's had a little bit of cognitive impairment, so we have to kind of work to stay focused on what we're talking about and things like that. Super nice guy. He and his wife are taking care of her mom, and they have 3 of their grandchildren living with you, if you can imagine. In a house. He used to do dental appliances, but because of his health challenge, he can't do that anymore, so he had lost his income. And Social Security, he's old enough to have Social Security, so he has some income. Now what he does, the only work he can find is being a proctor for one of these agencies that give you your test to be a real estate broker or securities broker or something like that. Owes practically nothing on his house, and he's way behind on his bills. What I'm going to be able to do for them is what's called a reverse mortgage. And with that, what we'll be able to do is pay off the little bit that he owes on his house, $60,000 worth of other debt, and give him another chunk because there's some work that he needs to do on his house, and he'd like to have a cash pad, and all his bill payments and his mortgage payment completely goes away. And they'll be able to, you know, live comfortably, stay where they are. Mom not going to last forever, so things will improve for them as time goes on. So, like I say, I've got at least another 4 or 5 of these, but I thought I might stop.
All right, we've got 30 seconds for questions.
Okay.
Anyone have a brief question? What are rates today?
Rates 30-year fixed for a conforming loan amount of $458,000 thereabouts. I would probably be quoting 4 1/4 today. 4 points.
Your cowboy philosophy reminded me of a piece of advice I once received. Never argue with anyone stupider than yourself.
Sage.
So it's like country slogan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.